Listen ad-free and get to know Natalie and me better by subscribing on Apple Podcast or heading over to patreon.com/themurderdiariespod. On Spotify, you can do the same by searching The Murder Diaries ad-free.
This episode was recorded at Spotify Studios. Welcome to The Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
Spokane County has the highest rate of domestic violence in Washington and nearly double the state average. That's at least according to the state data and the Spokesman Review. It continues saying that a majority of homicide in the area are related to domestic violence. And while usually domestic violence is associated with intimate partner violence, it's broadly defined as violent or aggressive behavior in the home. That means it can occur outside of an intimate partner relationship. The violence could be against anyone who lives in the same home as the abuser.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Courtney Karina Holden was born on February 28, 1992, in Washington state. And unfortunately, not much is known about her background or early life. She was Native American, but there was no tribal affiliation listed anywhere. It's very possible that she didn't know her roots, as she didn't live with her biological parents for very long. At an early age, she was placed into foster care. We don't know the where, the how, or the why. We just know that she entered the system as a young child. After bouncing around foster homes for a bit, she went to stay with Judy Holden, a woman who made a career out of fostering children in her 3-bed, 2-bath Spokane house. Not because she was a warm, loving, or kind-hearted person, but because the children came with a regular income, and if she played her cards right, she could use that to live off of. Before I get any further with today's episode, it's very important to Paige and I that we make something clear. The money foster parents are paid isn't much, and foster families often spend out of their own pockets to ensure that the kids have everything they need in terms of food, clothing, and enrichment activities. Not to mention the emotional cost to foster parents who pour their love and time into supporting the most vulnerable of children. We aren't talking about those foster parents, and we send our love and admiration for those who are drawn to fostering out of the goodness of their hearts. Judy wasn't one of them. She wasn't spending a dime more than she absolutely had to on the children in her care, and she funneled the rest into funding her life. And no, she didn't make up for the lack of money being spent with kindness either. It's unclear exactly when, but Courtney was adopted by the Holdens after being placed in their care.
A note here is that there was a Mr. Holden, although he's rarely mentioned in any of the reporting. According to storiesoftheunsolved.com, Judy and her husband divorced and he moved out of the house. What's more is that we did find during our research that Mr. Holden was the one who filed for the divorce.
Jensen Tyler, who was a foster child in the house at the same time as Courtney, told KHQ News that he lived in fear during his time in the Holden house. But it wasn't Judy that he was most afraid of. It was her biological son, Joshua. Joshua Holden was 10 to 15 years older than the foster children, and he was frequently violent.
There were other biological Holden children besides Joshua who will come up later. However, it's unclear if they lived in the home at the same time as Courtney. It's unlikely that they did, though, given the age gap between those biological children and Courtney.
Jensen Tyler told the same publication that he lived in the Holden house until he was 12. And he had been there so long that he didn't have any memories of being anywhere else. His brother, who wasn't named in the article, was also placed there. Jensen said he believed that the Holdens only took in children for the money, and he spoke of the abuse the foster children suffered in the 4 walls of the house. He said, "It was like my brother was a dog and just there for Joshua to beat up." Along with the physical abuse, there was mental torture. And the children just tried to survive it all. Jensen's brother eventually stabbed an unidentified member of the Holden family, which caused a chain reaction, ending with him and his brother leaving the house with the help of their biological sisters who were not placed with them. Jensen and his brother, although free from the Holdens, were scarred by their experiences. Jensen spent his teens and 20s fighting addiction and getting on the wrong side of the law, while his brother sadly passed away. But Jensen said that the pain of addiction and losing his brother is nothing compared to the pain he suffered at the hands of Joshua Holden. Joshua was accused of rape in 2005, with the survivor saying she tried to escape, and he said, "I'm not done with you yet." These charges were dropped before the case went to trial, according to the Charlie Project, because the survivor stopped cooperating with prosecutors. According to the Spokesman Review, court documents in the 2005 case cited another rape from 2003 that Joshua was suspected of. The review continues saying, neighbors and family described Joshua as unstable, violent, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. A neighbor said Joshua doesn't have a job and Judy cowers before him. In addition, multiple people had restraining orders out on him, and he had a history of domestic violence. During our research for this episode, we found multiple court filings against Joshua for domestic violence in the late 1990s. He had previously been arrested for unlawful imprisonment and domestic violence, and he had been charged and convicted of burglary. Family members are chillingly quoted saying that Joshua would brag about it being easy to kill someone and hide the body. Standing 6 foot tall and weighing 300 pounds, he no doubt used his stature to control people and get what he wanted. Jensen said that after he and his brother moved out, Courtney was the only one left, and she became the target of Joshua's abuse. Joshua did eventually move out. He was a grown man after all, and Courtney continued to live in the house with Judy. As time went on, Courtney met a young man named Michael, and they started a relationship. When she was 20 in 2012, she gave birth to their son, Stephen. Now, this isn't his real name, but he is a minor and he deserves as much privacy as possible, so that's what we're going to call him. The relationship with Michael was short-lived, and Courtney continued living in the Holden house with her son and Judy. Courtney had full custody of Stephen, but there was a parenting plan in place that allowed Michael to have regular visits and access. Michael followed the parenting plan until Stephen was around 5 years old. But we're going to put a pin in that for now. In 2014, Joshua moved back into the Holden home with Judy, Courtney, and little Stephen. But when he moved back in, he installed security cameras around the house. Neighborhood gossip said that Joshua had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, so the neighbors assumed that the camera installation was part of that hypervigilance that can often go along with a schizophrenia diagnosis. This living situation continued, just the four of them, as Judy was in her 70s and was no longer able to foster children. The abuse of Courtney also continued, as Judy and Joshua forced her to do all of the chores and called her Cindy, which, as it turns out, is a super unoriginal nickname for Cinderella. Judy and Joshua even made Stephen call them Mom and Dad, instead of the more appropriate Grandma and Uncle Josh. And they made Stephen call Courtney by her first name. They reportedly told Stephen that his name was Forrest and insisted that he go by that name instead of the one his mom gave him. Joshua would also occasionally tell people that Stephen was his son, which was entirely untrue. When Stephen was around 5 years old, his dad Michael stopped enforcing the parenting plan and didn't ask for his time with Stephen. He wasn't in a good place dealing with addiction and an unspecified emergency with another one of his children. In mid-2019, things had calmed down and Michael was ready to be the dad that his son deserved. So he reached out to Courtney to ask to see Stephen, but he couldn't get a hold of her. Michael's girlfriend Autumn tried to contact Courtney to see if she could talk to her and make arrangements for Michael to see his son. Autumn knew Courtney and she didn't think she would be ignoring Michael on purpose. She wasn't the type to hold a grudge and she would have wanted Stephen to see his dad. Autumn was actually the one who raised the alarm about Courtney and called the authorities. Neither she nor Michael could reach her. And on October 5th, 2019, she called the Spokane County non-emergency number known as Crime Check to request a welfare check.
By this point, it had been 18 months since Autumn had seen or heard from Courtney. And while she hadn't been seeking her out until recently, she was worried about the lack of contact since she had last reached out. We're so excited to launch our journal entries series. You can listen ad-free to the Journal Entry series by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/themurderdiariespod or subscribing on Apple. If you're on Spotify, you can also search The Murder Diaries ad-free and listen there.
So you're probably wondering what journal entries are. And if you've ever had a bestie, you know that you can be on the phone with them forever. Or at least that's how Paige and I's relationship is. We can be on the phone with each other for 45 minutes and not even blink an eye. So that's what these journal entries are. They're going to be things we're reading, watching, and just shooting the shit with each other. That was kind of gross sounding, but... So join us. We can't wait to have you there.
For $2.99, you can join us ad-free. Again, head over to Patreon, search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify, or subscribe on Apple. We'll see you there.
Bye.
Bye.
Join Season of Justice on September 25th, 2024 for our second annual Day of Giving. In honor of National Homicide Victim Remembrance Day, we are looking to double our impact from last year and fund 2 public awareness campaigns in one day. That is $10,000. We need your help to drive meaningful impact for families who have lost or are missing loved ones. Mark your calendars and be sure to donate on September 25th at givebutter.com/SOJDOG24. Together, we can solve cold cases.
Michael called the police the day after Autumn did, but his call was about Stephen. There was an active parenting order in place, and he was within his legal rights to enforce it. He knew his son had been living in Judy's house and had every reason to believe he was still there. Police attempted the welfare check on October 8th, but Judy and Joshua were uncooperative, and that made officers suspicious. Because ordinarily, people are receptive to welfare checks, and they see them being done out of the concern for someone's well-being. Joshua told police that Courtney and Stephen had moved out with an unnamed boyfriend. So police weren't granted access to the house, and Joshua refused to answer any more questions. Later that day, Crime Check received a phone call from Courtney saying that she was fine. Stephen was fine. It was all fine. But police had a feeling it wasn't actually Courtney calling, and they went ahead and declared Courtney and Stephen missing. Their suspicions were correct, and it was later discovered that it was Courtney's sister who made the call. It is clarified in later reporting that the sister was one of Judy's daughters. Police began their investigation by contacting any friends or family that Courtney had. And unfortunately, she had lost touch with most of her friends over the years, as often happens in abusive situations. The victim is isolated from any support system they may have by their abuser so that they have no choice but to stay. On October 9th, investigators managed to get a hold of Ruben, Courtney's biological brother, and his girlfriend, who was coincidentally also named Courtney. So, to save some confusion for our listeners, we're going to call Ruben's girlfriend Courtney C. C was friends with Courtney before she started dating Ruben, and she was very happy to cooperate with the investigation and tell the police everything she knew, including that she and Ruben had been visiting the Holden house over the last 18 months. And in those visits, they had seen Stephen there every single time, but hadn't seen Courtney for a year and a half. Judy had told C and Ruben that Courtney had run off with a new boyfriend, abandoning Stephen. C didn't think that sounded like something Courtney would do because she was a loving and dedicated mother. However, stranger things have happened, so C didn't call the police to report her concerns, but she was more than happy to share them once they contacted her. C also told investigators that Joshua made her use a different name around Stephen, so he didn't hear the name Courtney and miss his mom, who he had been told had abandoned him. According to KXLY.com, C said, "I had maybe put it in my mind that maybe Courtney checked herself into a mental institution or something, and that she was getting some help. That's what I wanted to believe." She then said that once she really became concerned, she didn't know where to start, and she was worried that she might be in danger if she was to ask too many questions. And with this new information, police were even more suspicious of Joshua. Investigators went back to the house, and this time, Judy spoke with them, but she still didn't want them in the house. On the porch, she said that Courtney had left a few days ago, walking off with her son and not returning. One of the investigators asked for her phone number so he could call if he had any more questions. and Judy deadbolted the door behind her when she went to get her number for him. When she returned, one of the investigators managed to convince Judy to let him in and to at least see Courtney's room. When he entered the house, there was clutter and mess everywhere. Junk was piled up and there wasn't a clear surface in sight. It was clear that no one was doing any housework or tidying in the Holden home recently. In Courtney's room, they noted a bare mattress with no pillows, sheet, or blanket. The room was a mess like the rest of the house, and it didn't look like the room had been inhabited for a while. Although from the sound of things, it shouldn't have been inhabited at all. The investigator asking to see Stephen's room was a step too far for Judy, and she withdrew consent for the police to be in the home. And because they didn't have a warrant, they had to leave immediately. Neighbors were interviewed, and they said they had seen Stephen over the past 12 months, but not Courtney. And they had seen Stephen as recently as the day they were interviewed, leaving the house with Joshua, Judy, and one of Judy's biological daughters. Judy had explained Courtney's absence by saying that she had met a man who drove trucks for a living, so she was off on the road with him, or that she had run off with a fiancé, or even that she was inside but busy and couldn't come and say hi. Some mentioned Stephen calling Judy and Joshua mom and dad, and thought it was odd. However, as previously mentioned, this was standard practice in the home even when Courtney was around. Multiple neighbors had concerning things to say about Courtney and the conditions she lived in. Police were told that Courtney had been seen with bruises, and when she was asked about them, she said they were from Joshua. According to the Charlie Project, Courtney said that Joshua would beat on her. Neighbors, family members, and former foster children said that Joshua was violent towards everyone in the home, including his mother. Neighbors reported that Judy seemed scared of her son. However, no one ever called the police to report the suspected abuse towards Judy or Courtney. Was it because everyone was an adult and people assumed they would leave if they wanted to? Maybe. But that certainly isn't the case in a lot of situations, including this one. Courtney had very few freedoms, even as a 26-year-old. She wasn't allowed her own cell phone, and when she left the house, she seemed to always have a family member chaperoning her. As we said before, she had lost touch with all of her friends over the years, so she was incredibly isolated in the home. The only real chance Courtney got to speak to people was when she was doing yard work and she would see a neighbor and have a chat. During one conversation, she told the neighbor that she needed Joshua's permission to leave the house, and she couldn't even sneak out because of the cameras. According to the Charlie Project, she said she was scared to leave the house without Joshua's permission. Despite the severe restrictions placed on Courtney, she did manage to create and maintain a Facebook account that Joshua didn't know about, at least for a period of time. However, once he found out about it, it was deleted. And her only connection to the outside world was gone. Her final message sent to someone she spoke to daily said, I gotta go, Josh is coming. Then nothing. Courtney, who had been allowed on the property to work during the day, started only doing yard work in the evenings once it was getting dark, so there were less opportunities for her to speak to her neighbors. Then the neighbors noticed that they weren't seeing Courtney at all. If anyone would ask about her, Judy would tell a story about her being off with a man she met, and sometimes she sprinkled in details like the man being a trucker just for good measure. And if anyone called the house asking for Courtney, they would be told that Courtney wasn't able to take the call at the time. According to the spokesman reviewed during an interview with a neighbor, they recounted a day in the summer of 2018 when they saw Courtney leaving the Holden house with a large duffel bag. So large, she was said to be dragging it. Judy chased after her, ordering her back into the house. Courtney said, "No, I'm not staying here anymore," before Joshua picked Courtney up and took her back into the house. At 160 pounds and around 5'6", she couldn't fight back against Joshua. The neighbors said that was the last time they saw Courtney, and it may have been the last time anyone apart from the Holdens saw her. In another neighbor interview, it was reported that Joshua was doing some digging in the backyard at night using spotlights to see. He explained to neighbors who inquired that he was installing a swing set, and knowing that Joshua had other odd behaviors, they brushed it off as another thing to add to the list. The investigators tried to narrow down the last time Courtney was seen by someone other than the Holdens, who had not exactly proven to be good and honest witnesses. Social media and phone records, where most investigators start when trying to narrow down the time of a disappearance, were out because Courtney had neither. She was on medication that needed refilling every month or two, and that was last collected from the pharmacy in July of 2018. But it wasn't confirmed that Courtney collected the medication. And some sources say that the last time Courtney for sure picked up from the pharmacy was in April of 2018. Bank records didn't show a halt in activity around that same time, though. Money came out of Courtney's account on the regular, and her EBT card was still used to buy groceries. Upon checking the camera at the supermarket, Joshua and Judy were seen using the card, accompanied by a child assumed to be Stephen. Courtney wasn't in the footage, though. ATM surveillance cameras showed the same thing. Money being withdrawn by Joshua and Judy with no sign of Courtney. The final withdrawal totaling $600 was made from Courtney's bank account either the day before or the day she was reported missing.
I know you know that sound you just heard, and it should be no shock that we're talking to you about Shopify again. As a reminder, that sound is actually the same sound you hear when you make another sale on your online Shopify store. But did you also know that Shopify is your partner for selling everywhere, online, in-store, social media, and beyond?
Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business, take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify.
Help yourself and your business by signing up for $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/murderdiaries, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/murderdiaries to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/murderdiaries. EBT stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer, and it allows welfare payments to be made to an electronic card, like a credit card, then used in certain stores that accept them, such as a grocery store.
With suspicion swirling and police being more convinced that something had happened to Courtney, Joshua and Judy fled. They packed up their 6 pets and the DVR connected to the home surveillance system and ran, leaving their house abandoned. When police went to serve a search warrant on October 24th, they were gone, and they had taken 7-year-old Stephen with them. Inside the home, police found computers, 18 cell phones, blackmail notes, and Courtney's journal. But there's no further information about what the blackmail notes were about or who they were written for. A month later, their cell phone numbers were disconnected, and 2 new numbers appeared on their account with Texas area codes. Around a week after that, a neighbor called the police to report that she had seen movement in the house. And I know what you're thinking. Were the Holdens back? Was it Courtney? Was she alive and okay and back for her son? The mystery movement in the house was coming from a daughter of Judy and her husband, who lived in Texas but had flown in to check on the family home. According to the Spokesman Review, when police asked where her mother and brother were, she said that Judy was taking a road trip to celebrate her retirement. Who said what during the next part of the conversation depends on the reporting. However, it's consistent that the daughter or her husband said that they assumed Courtney had Stephen, but the other said that Stephen was with Joshua and Judy. And as a quick clarification, this was a different daughter from the one who impersonated Courtney on the phone earlier in the episode. Investigators found out that Joshua, Judy, and Stephen had arrived at Judy's daughter's house in Plano on November 26th. It took nearly a month before authorities went to Texas to retrieve Stephen and arrest Judy and Joshua. On December 19th, the pair were taken into custody. Stephen was unharmed and Michael traveled to Texas to get custody of his son. As for Judy and Joshua, well, They were charged with identity theft for using Courtney's bank account and for custodial interference for keeping Stephen from his father. Neither of them were charged with anything relating to Courtney or her disappearance. And there was still no sign of Courtney anywhere. People don't disappear off the face of the planet. So where was she? While 74-year-old Judy and 40-year-old Joshua sat in a Texas jail, refusing to speak to police or to be extradited back to Washington, cadaver dogs were being used to search the Holden property. The late-night swing set installation may have seemed like a weird thing Joshua was doing to the neighbors, but to police, it sounded suspicious. The dogs didn't detect anything on the property, and the area was not excavated. The police didn't have any evidence to press further charges, although they believed that Judy and Joshua knew more than they were saying about Courtney's whereabouts. In the interim, between leaving Spokane and arriving in Plano, they had stayed in an RV park in Oklahoma under fake names. When investigators found out about this, they searched the RV and areas of the park, but they didn't find any evidence. Judy's daughter's house was also searched, but again, no sign of Courtney. The Holdens retained an attorney who said that Stephen was left in Judy and Joshua's care, so they weren't interfering with the custody of a child, since they had permission from the custodial parent to have him. Once the attorney found Courtney, she could confirm that. But of course, no one's surprised that Courtney wasn't found and couldn't confirm the story. Joshua and Judy eventually returned to Spokane and ended up being released from custody due to the COVID outbreak. Once he did appear in court, Joshua Holden ended up pleading guilty on charges of custodial interference and criminal mischief. He was sentenced to 135 days in jail, less time served. Judy, on the other hand, entered a guilty plea to second-degree custodial interference, but we couldn't find her sentencing. At the time of this recording, Courtney hasn't been seen since the spring or summer of 2018. If she were alive, she would be 32 years old. However, investigators have no reason to believe that she is living. She is listed as endangered missing. Authorities strongly suspect that she was murdered. However, without evidence, they can't press charges. It would just take one person to change the course of this case. That's where all of you come in. If you have any information relating to Courtney Holden's case, please contact the Spokane Police Department at 509-755-2489. Again, that is 509-755-2489. We want to give a special thanks to Charlie at the Crime Lines podcast for her research on Courtney's case.
Make sure you follow us on all of our socials at the Murder Diaries Pod. And what are you waiting for? Subscribe right now on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. And until then,
stay safe.
Bye.
Seeking the truth never gets old, even when it hides in the shadows. Immerse yourself in the world of June's Journey, a free-to-play hidden object game set in the roaring 20s. Solve the mystery of the devious gossip spreader and celebrate our 7th anniversary with exclusive events, never-before-seen decorations, thrilling mysteries, and exciting giveaways. The adventure and the gossip awaits. Are you ready for the journey? Download June's Journey today for free on Android or iOS.